right, we're back. Graveyard Shift Movie Podcast, episode number 117. And this week, it was supposed to be Bride of Chucky, but it's not, because Tyler can't stop playing League of Legends. So it's just me again this week. And this week, we're watching a movie called Shudder from 2008, which is a movie that I bought for $5 at my old job on we had like a little movie rack before at like the self checkout or whatever, and I picked it up, never watched it, so I figured this was a perfect time to watch the movie. I believe that it's a remake of a Thai movie that was then remade into a Japanese movie that then was remade again. So I think there's 3 different versions of this movie, but I have the American version, so I think the final one. But yeah, I'm gonna give it a 4. I didn't like it very much. It was pretty predictable about the twist at the end. A lot of the effects were pretty bad, and it's just all around. It was like it's a PG-13 2000s horror movie. Like maybe the worst decade of horror, which is the 2000s, and it's not even rated R. So you have I think there's 2 or 3 different PG-13 sex scenes and shit. So it's just, yeah, it's not great. Yeah, that's about that's about what I can say. Also, I'm pretty sure there's a video game that has this exact same feature, which is taking the picture to use the light source and shit, but I don't remember what the name of the game is. So, but hey, anyway, spoiler warning for Shudder. If you've never seen it, I'm gonna ruin everything about it, so you've been warned. The movie starts off with our main characters, Ben and the wife. I don't know her name. I didn't really care to learn her name. But they've just gotten married in New York City. And they're in their shitty little apartment that has a bunch of fucking brown stains everywhere. And it's just it's just a bad looking apartment. And they're about to bang, but the dude keeps taking photos of her. And she's like, oh, this is what I get for marrying a photographer. And I was like, Jesus Christ, that's the best thing y'all could come up with to introduce what this guy does for a living, is just have her be like, well, I married a photographer. I guess this is what I get, you know? So he's taking pictures of her, and he's like, hey, we're gonna fucking bang. And they do. You don't see it, because once again, PG-13. But they bang. After they get done banging, the next day they're heading to Japan for their honeymoon, but at the same time, dude has a job in Japan as well. So he's double dipping, because he's on his honeymoon, but he's also working at the same time. It's very weird. They landed and they're in the car on the way to their it's not a house. Maybe it is a house. Their house or their cabin that they're staying in. But they're only staying in for a night, because then we'll learn that they're getting hooked up with this whole suite building or whatever to stay in. So I don't know. But they're driving, and for a second I forgot that we were in Japan now, because she looks over at him, and she's in the right seat, which in America is the passenger seat. And she looks over, and dude is zonked out, just dead asleep. And I was like, holy shit, this dude just fucking passed out. And very quickly I was like, oh, okay, she's the one driving. I forgot about it for a minute. But she's driving. She wakes him up, and she's like, hey, I need you to look at this map, you know? So he whips open the map, and he looks down, and as soon as he looks down, she looks up, and there's a woman crossing the street in front of her, who she immediately hits, and it looks really bad. And then the wife, somehow she slams on the brakes after hitting the woman and starts doing donuts through the street, and then straightening out but still somehow going, even though we just saw her hitting the brakes a second ago and careening down a hill and slamming into a tree. So the husband is instantly knocked out, but before she passes out, she like looks over into the rearview mirror and sees the woman that they hit like standing back up. So she's like, oh, and then she fucking passes out. When they wake up, it's fucking snowing. It's freezing outside. And the husband like nudges her so she wakes up, and immediately she's like, the woman, and she just jumps out of the car, not showing any effects of the car crash, the head-on collision with the tree at all. And she goes to look for the lady, but of course the fucking lady's gone, and she's like, we gotta find her, but the guy's like, it's fucking freezing, we'll call the cops, they'll do it. So the cops come, they clean up everything. They're like, listen, if there was a lady, someone must have picked her up, she's nowhere around here, so you can't really worry about it. So the dude is like, well, sounds good for me, and he just takes his girl, and they go to, like I said, their house or their cabin that I guess they're only staying in for the night. They're staying there, and dude walks in, and the whole time he's like, oh man, oh, my shoulder, I feel like I tweaked something. And so I was like, fucking possessed. Like that was like the demon went into his shoulder and is like gonna take over his body, Spoiler alert, that is not what happened. It's a very it's a very different reason why his shoulder is hurting, and some would say that it's stupider than what I thought was gonna was the reason. The next morning, she's like feeling down because she did just hit a woman in the middle of the road. But the dude is like, don't think about it. We're taking pictures. We're having a good time. And so he's like, listen, if she got hit, but she wasn't anywhere around there, someone must have found her. I'm sure she's like in a hospital bed, eating some ice cream, and people are signing her a cast and stuff. She's fine. So the lady's like, okay, that sounds good. So they go and they start taking pictures on the balcony of like this loft they're in. And it turns over and it zooms into the camera and it starts playing like this ominous noise as the camera's like taking photos and stuff. And it was like, what the fuck is going on? I was like, is the camera possessed? Like, what's going on? So they head over to the building that dude is going to be working in, and they meet with his friend Marco, I believe is his friend's name. And the dude's like, oh man, I'm really glad you were here. Let me show you the area. So he shows him like his studio he can work in and like this dark room and everything. And then he's like, here's where you guys will be staying. And it's this giant like mega bachelor apartment that the wife is like, this is amazing, But she does keep looking over to like this one room on the way to the apartment that has this ominous like chair just sitting in the middle of the room. And every time she passes it, she's like, oh, what's going on there, And no one else lives on this floor because it's still being built, I think is what Marco said. So it's just them. No one else is on this floor. It's either on the floor or the whole building, maybe. Either way, they're alone where they are. So immediately to christen the new apartment, they start banging. But once again, it's PG-13, so you don't see anything. You see her like take her shirt off, but it's from like the back. And it just keeps playing the super cringy 2000s acoustic soft melody rock that just keeps going, you are so good to me. You are so good to me. And it was like, this is awful. So they bang, and then they pass out. And that night, the wife has a dream about the lady they hit. But this time in the dream, the lady, like, crawls up on the windshield, and she's like, and then she, like, falls off, and the wife wakes up and was like, what the fuck was that, So, the next morning they wake up, and he's like, hey, come check out the pictures of us on the balcony. And so they're looking at it, but there's this weird blur that keeps popping up in all the photos. And so he's like, ah, shit, I must have loaded in the film wrong, that sucks. Uh, and she's like, yeah, whatever. The blur photo will become the biggest fucking point of the whole movie, really. So the husband goes to work. He's taking photos and shit. The wife just walks around the town, like taking pictures. She's going through like a Japanese casino and shit. She gets in trouble for taking a selfie in the casino. Like one of the guards yells at her, and she's like, "Oh, sorry." So she comes back after being out for the whole day, and she starts showing she comes back, and her husband has this assistant. And the girl's like, hey, can I see the photos you were taking? And so the wife's like, sure. So the woman's looking at the photos, but then that blur keeps popping up. And the woman is like, oh, shit, these are spirit photos. And it captured a spirit. And she either says that it's her boyfriend or her brother that runs a whole magazine just about spirit photography. And the wife is like, is it really that big of a deal here? And she's like, yeah, it's a pretty big deal. So she's like, hey, you should go talk to him. He can explain to you more what these photos mean. And so she's like, all right, sounds good. So the next day, the wife heads to the magazine place, but the husband is working on another photo shoot. And as he's like moving the models and shit, how he wants them to stand. And then all of a sudden he gets like this flash of just bright light in his face, and it gets all windy, and he sees like a lady standing in front of him. And the lady is saying, you left me. And it sort of clears up, and he sees the assistant standing there, and he's like, what the fuck did you just say to me? And she's like, what? Nothing. And he's like, all right, that's what I thought. And so, yeah, so he's like, all right, whatever. That was weird. So he just goes back to work. The wife is visiting the dude who runs the magazine. And for the most part, it turns out that this magazine is full of shit because people just want to see scary photos. So the dude just sort of like, he just makes it look scary. He just photoshops it. But it was founded because the first picture the magazine ever had was him as a child, and his mom had just passed away. And he has a Polaroid of the mom standing like next to, you can see like the spirit and sort of make out her face and stuff. And so he takes her to like this room where he shows her all these photos of people and like spirits in the background. And he tells her that, this happens because these spirits are connected to someone. There's a strong emotional connection that attaches them to the body and all this shit. And she's like, well, how do you know these aren't just faked? And he's like, well, the only true way to know it's not faked is if it's from a Polaroid camera. And he takes out a Polaroid and he's like, see, look at this. You push down the shutter and then you take a picture and there's no negative. And I was like, he said the name of the movie. And so, yeah, so he's like, if you really want to know you captured a ghost, use a Polaroid camera. So, later on in the movie, the wife just goes around with a Polaroid, like, taking photos and shit. Also, he's like, if you want to ask more questions, you could go and ask this dude who's this super famous medium that they just did an interview with, and he can explain more to you. So later on in the movie, they'll go and visit that guy too. Over to the husband, and he is in the dark room developing the photos he just took. And as he's like dipping it in the solution to develop the photo, it starts to come into view, and he sees the ghost lady in the photo. And then in the photo, she turns and looks at him. And this causes him to freak out, and he drops his like tongs into the solution, and it splashes up into his face and like burns his eyes. And so he's like, oh fuck, and he's stumbling out, and he looks at his face, and it's just like blood everywhere. And he's like, what is this, but then his assistant walks in, and when he turns to look at her, the blood has disappeared. Classic horror movie stuff where the blood disappears anytime someone else walks in. So, the wife is on her way home. She's riding like the subway, and as she is, she looks over into one of the windows and she sees the ghost lady standing there. And every time they pass like a pillar or something, the ghost lady like changes until eventually she's just like a skull and like a skeleton. And the wife like freaks out and she's like, "What the fuck was that?" And she's like on the floor and people are looking at her like, "What's going on with this chick?" She even tries to like pry open the door and get out, but people have to like restrain her and stop her from getting out. So she gets back home to the husband, and the husband is in the kitchen with his assistant, just upset, and he's looking at the photos. And he's like, "Fuck, it's all ruined. This is terrible." And so she's like, "What's going on?" And he tells her that all of the film from the shoot he did for the day is ruined. And he shows it, and it all has like the spirit mark. But on the surface, it just looks like a blur effect, like a lens flare kind of thing. And I was like, man, you could just pass that off as like an art effect. Like, you're just doing, this is art. Like, you could just sell it as, oh yeah, this is, an effect I added for the photo. But he's like, no, everything's fucking ruined. I can't use any of this. And so the wife is like, all right, well, listen to this. I have a theory that maybe this thing that keeps popping up in our pictures is that woman that we hit on the road. And he's like, what? And he's like, you're fucking crazy. He starts talking shit to her. And I swear, I sort of zoned out here, so I'm sorry. But he says a line like, "I'm not your father." And so I remember hearing that and being like, oh shit, is there going to be like a backstory of like her father was fucking crazy or something like that? But no, they never mention her dad or her family at all at any point in the remainder of the movie. And they don't mention anything about his family either. So I don't know what that line was. Maybe before that he was like, "I'm not going to treat you like a child" or something like that. But either way, she gets pissed off. And so he ends up sleeping on the couch for the night. Good quality H2O, by the way. You gotta stay hydrated. So the next day, the dude goes to the doctor because his shoulder has still been bothering him since the crash. And as he's there, he's getting weighed by one of the nurses. And the nurse keeps having this like befuddled look on her face, and she keeps making him step on and off of the scale. And we don't see what that is right now, but later on in the movie, it'll come back. He goes into the doctor's office, and the doctor's like, "Listen, I don't see any, serious injury here, but I'll give you some fucking pain medicine, And so he's like, "All right, I guess I'll take that." So once again, he goes back home. He's working in the dark room again, and he starts having his ear rubbed by this woman, and she's like humming and shit, and he like sort of leans into it. And he thinks it's the wife. And he's like, "Hey, I'm really sorry, about yelling at you or whatever." But then he gets a phone call and he's like, "Shit, that's probably the agency. Hold on, I'll be right back." So he goes out and he answers the phone. But it's the wife who's out amongst the town. And she's like, "Hey, sorry. I don't want us to fight anymore." And he like drops the phone and just sort of walks back into the dark room. And when he opens up the curtain, he sees the lady they hit on the road, like with her back turned to her. And so she slowly turns around and looks at him. And then we see something moving underneath the skin of her face. And eventually it pops out through her eye. And it's a fly that goes flying away. And this causes him to freak out. And he's screaming. The wife, who's still holding the phone outside, and she hears him screaming. So she starts running home. And when she gets home, she finds him sitting in that chair that she's been eyeballing the whole time. And it keeps playing like the ominous music. And his back is to her. So he or she goes creeping over and she's like, "Ben, are you all right, And she touches him and he's like, "Oh," and he like grabs her hand. But he's all right. But he is, freaked out. And surprisingly, he admits that he saw the ghost lady. I figured this was going to be one of the things where he was like, "Oh no, I didn't see anything." Because at first he says something like, "I thought the stress was getting to me." So I thought he was going to play it off as like he's stressed or whatever. But no, he admits, he's like, "Yeah, I just saw a demon waif." It's like, so she tells him that girl that they hit on the road is angry because of what they did, and she wants to figure out how to help the girl. So she wants to go see this medium that the guy told her about. Uh, so that's exactly what they do. They go and see the medium, and they ask him how all this stuff works. And the medium tells them that it's because of a strong emotional reaction, either too much love or too much hate. It attaches someone's spirit to the body, and when they die, it like traps them in death to that person. And um and so you're like, okay, well, they must, the girl's fucking pissed off that these people left her for dead on the side of the road or wherever she was, right? So they're like, well, how can we help? So he takes the photo and like presses his hand onto it, and he's doing like medium shit where he's like, like the South Park shit. And he's like, turns his back to him, but then he turns around and he just starts yelling at them. And the wife is like, what is he saying? Because she doesn't speak Japanese. Ben lived in Japan for a long time, so he speaks Japanese. So he's like, he's telling us that he won't help us and we're on our own and shit. And he just like drags her out of the place. So they're on their own. And so the wife is really upset. So she goes back home and starts looking at the photos that he took at that photo shoot where he saw the lady and the pictures were ruined. And she notices that every picture, the spirit pops up on the 17th floor of this TGK building. And so she's like, okay, well, something must be going on there. So she calls her husband's assistant lady, and she asks if there's a Polaroid camera she could borrow. And they're like, yeah, of course, So this is when I first wrote down that the big twist of this movie is going to turn out that the husband and his friends, because we were also introduced to another friend at like a party, but literally that's the only scene he pops up in until like 40 more minutes into the movie. But I wrote down that it's going to turn out that the husband and like the two friends like raped and murdered this chick forever ago. And that's why all of this is happening. Because I was pretty sure that the building she was going in is the building that the friend works in even, but I'm not sure if it was. But either way, I was like, that's probably what's going to happen. She goes into the office building and she's walking around taking pictures. Until eventually she gets one where she sees the ghost lady in the picture. And even though that's what she came here to do, it freaks her out and she starts to run out of the place. But we see the ghost lady's shadow like on the wall run and beat her to the door and slam it shut and like lock it and shit. And as that happens, it knocks over this photo that's on the wall. So the wife picks it up to investigate it, and she sees that the girl whose name is Megumi is in the picture, and when she flips the picture around, she sees that the photograph was taken by her husband. So she heads back home to confront her husband. The husband just finished another photography job, and he's like lounging on the couch when the fucking lights go out, and it keeps flashing, like the bulbs for his photos keep going off. So you get like a snippet of what's happening. And the dude is like, hey, who turned the lights off? What's going on, And I'm like, dude, literally 2 scenes ago, you saw a ghost woman. Like, you should know what's going on at this point, But he doesn't. He's still playing dumb. But every time it flashes, we see the ghost girl, like, moving around the room. And eventually she, like, shoves him over and shit. And he's freaking out. He's crawling towards the door. When finally the wife shows up and like turns on the light, and he's like, oh, thank God, the ghost lady was here. But she crouches down in front of him and shows him the photo, And she's like, you knew her. What did you know about her? So, the husband tells her that when he lived in Japan, he had a relationship with Megumi. And she had never been in a serious relationship before. And so she didn't really know how to act. Not her husband, that would have been a different story. Her dad was very old fashioned, and he didn't like the idea of his daughter dating like this, American foreigner, dude. So he didn't approve of the he didn't approve of the relationship. So he was planning, or they were gonna break up, and she like gave him this camera as like a gift and shit. But then all of a sudden her dad died suddenly, and he says that changed her and it made her more clingy and needy of him. And we see like her like holding him constantly and like, Ben, you gotta come over, Ben, and he's like, I couldn't fall in love with her as much as I tried. I couldn't love her. And she was able to tell that, and it made her more possessive and upset. And eventually she became dangerous. She became dangerous to me and to herself. We see her like holding a shard of glass and like her hands are bleeding and shit. And apparently he breaks up with her. And apparently she started to stalk him. And so his two friends, Marco and the other guy, I don't know his name, apparently went and talked to her. And the wife is like, well, what did they tell her? And he's like, they just told her to stop. And, she did. So he's like, once again, that doesn't. So then she's like, well, why was she on the road? And he's like, well, maybe she was following me this whole time and she just happened to step out, So he's like, listen, this is all too much. Why don't we just why don't we just go back to New York and, I can get a new job, but I don't want to risk losing you, And so she's like, yeah, let's go back to New York. So that night when the wife is asleep, Ben calls Marco and is like, hey, I was thinking about Megumi recently. And Marco's like, oh yeah, that's funny you should mention that. I just saw her yesterday. And Ben is like, really? And he's like, yeah, I saw her. She was down the street and she was just like pointing at me. He was like, it was really freaky. I just turned around and walked the other way, And he's like, oh man, you're sure it was her? And he's like, yeah, for sure it was her. But before he can go further into it, the wife like wakes up and she's like, who are you talking to? And he's like, nobody, So he hangs up, and then we go over to the other friend I mentioned, who's popped up in the one scene where they were like having dinner. And it instantly paints him as kind of this sleazy dude who he's taking pictures of these ladies who want to be models, and he's making them like take pictures in their underwear and stuff. Granted, the one girl he has with him now definitely doesn't seem to be put off by this. It seems like she's into it, She's like wearing this cowboy hat and he's taking pictures of her in the underwear, and they're totally just planning on banging afterwards. But as he's like taking pictures, the ghost girl keeps popping up. Megumi keeps popping up in like his lens, and he's like, what the fuck is going on, And, eventually she turns into like this weird like see-through blob looking thing, and she comes closer to the camera, and the next thing you know, it just like explodes and his eye is fucking gone. And I thought that killed him, but apparently it didn't, because then Marco calls Ben the next day and tells him that the dude is in the hospital. Now here's the thing, folks, you never see that friend again. Like, Ben and the wife go to the hospital to see him, but you never get a scene of them actually talking to him. So that friend is never seen again. That's the end of him for this movie. So technically, I think he might have lived. He has a fucked up eye, but I think he might still be alive at the end of the movie. So yeah, the dude tells them that the dude had an accident and his eye's gone or whatever, and he's at the hospital. And then he hangs up, and as soon as he hangs up, the camera pans over, and we see Megumi standing behind him. And so you're like, oh, well, shit, this guy's fucking dead, you know? So Ben and the wife go to the hospital to meet with the friend who just had his eye taken out. But they call Marco, because Marco hasn't gotten there yet. And so we see Marco have his phone, and you see his hand turn it on and put it on, like, speaker. And you hear Ben like, hey man, are you coming? What's going on? But you never see Marco's body, but we do see him in his hand with a razor blade, and he's just cutting up photos, and like his hand is all bloody and shit. And it's like, oh, what's going on with this, you know? So I guess since he didn't answer, they go over to Marco's apartment to look for him, and eventually he comes stumbling like out of a closet, just wearing boxers, and he's like in a daze. And there's a scene where he's just like staring at the wife for like a good 20 seconds or so, and then he just fucking Usain Bolt hauls ass to the balcony and just jumps off, and we get it's super 2000s CG like body hit the ground and shit. And yeah, so Marco fucking jumps to his death. And they're pretty convinced after that. Oh, you know what? Maybe that guy does die, because they're like, oh, Megumi did this. And Ben is like, yeah, Megumi killed my friends. So maybe that guy died in the hospital. But I'm not 100% on that. But either way, Megumi is fucking up his friends. And so the wife is like, well, why? We're the ones that hit her. And he's like, I don't know, you know? So they go back to their apartment. They're packing up to leave to head back to New York. But as they are, there's a FedEx package that the wife opens up, and it ends up being the wedding photos. And as she's looking through the wedding photos, she sees that Megumi is in all of the photos. So she knows that even if they leave, you know, it doesn't matter, because Megumi was with them before they even got here, and they hit her. So Megumi was dead before they even got to Japan. So this turns into Ringu for a second, where they're like, well, we gotta find the body. That'll break the spell, you know? So they go to Megumi's apartment, and they're looking around, and I did find it weird. I guess maybe he just thought they were gonna find the dead body, because he's like, oh, she's not here, we gotta go. And I was like, well, yeah, because she's fucking dead. Like, she's not alive. Like, her spirit is in all the photos. But maybe he was talking about the body. He didn't think the body was here. So they're about to leave, but before they leave, they look into like this other room, and they see Megumi sitting in a chair with her back turned to them. So they go walking up behind her, and the husband like knocks over these bottles, and he's crouching down, and he's like, he keeps looking at these bottles, and I was like, why the fuck is he so interested in these bottles? The wife walks up on Megumi, and of course, it just so happens to be perfectly timed that as the wife steps into the room, Megumi's head falls back, and it turns out that she's a skeleton. She's fucking dead. All these flies and shit bust out of her face. And somehow her hair is still perfect, which I don't think that... I think your hair withers as well. Well, no, it does keep growing, right? Isn't that the thing? Hair keeps growing after you're dead? And your fingernails, right? Or is that a fucking myth? Either way, it's perfectly timed that the body just so happens to fall apart as she walks in. You know, no matter how long it's been there to decay to that point, but it's never fallen over before. But yeah, anyway. And so then it goes back to the husband, and we see that the bottles he has is cyanide. And so presumably Megumi fucking killed herself, and so that's why she's a spirit. So that night, they're asleep, and the dude like he starts getting cuddled, and he's like leans over, and he thinks he's cuddling the wife, but it's Megumi, and so he wakes up, and he's like, what the fuck was that? And when he looks at the foot of the bed, he sees Megumi standing there at the foot of the bed. And she crawls up into bed and straddles him. And then she like takes off her dress, and we see her back, and her body is all like black and rotten, and it looks like it's bubbling kinda and shit. And the dude starts like screaming. He wakes up the wife, but of course Megumi is gone when the wife wakes up. And so he's like, "Oh fuck, what's going on?" The wife apparently doesn't give a shit, and she just goes right back to sleep. But Ben is still all scared, so he goes in the bathroom, and he's washing his face, but he keeps hearing this noise. And so when he comes out of the bathroom, he sees Megumi sitting there brushing her hair. And she turns and like looks at him, and he starts freaking out again. And I was like, guys, we literally did this scene in the last scene. There was no time in between these two scares. Also, he just saw this lady black and rotten, and why would this scare him? Like, just her, like, you like my fucking perm? Like, I didn't understand why this would bother him as much as well. But it does. So he, like, does the classic horror movie shit where he, like, falls back and he's, like, crawling. And she catches up to him, and he's, like, cornered in a corner. That makes sense. And then she has a really bad, long CGI tongue come out of her mouth, and she starts to French kiss this dude. The wife wakes up and sees Ben on the floor choking. And she's like, "What's going on?" And he's like foaming up, or he's puking or something. But bugs, I think flies, are like flying out of his mouth and shit. And he's like flopping around, and then he's like, ugh. And I was like, oh shit, he's fucking dead. Like, I thought that was it for him. The wife gets up and starts just yelling at Megumi. And she's like, the reason he left is because he never loved you and shit. And then, like, the window curtains just wrap around her and, like, fling her into the window and, like, press her up against the glass. And eventually the glass shatters, but it somehow, like, shoots her back. Like, I'm not really sure how that works, but whatever. So it shoots her back. And then she goes down to Ben, and she's, like, shaking him. And then Ben's like, and he wakes up, and it starts playing like happy music. And I was like, do they think like the curse is broken now? Like, what? Like, they were acting like it was done now. So the next day, or, maybe not the next day, but the next scene, they have a funeral for Megumi, where they like have a whole thing, and they bring her body into this place where they have it cremated and shit. And yeah, so I think, once again, kind of like Ringu, I think they thought they found the body, and, the curse was lifted. So they go back to New York. Life goes on. Some time passes until one day the wife gets a fucking package in the mail, and it's more photos. It's the photos that the guy had been taking the night of their wedding before they left for Japan. And so she's looking through the photos, but as she is, Megumi is in the photos. And for some reason, the wife is like, no. And I was like, well, yeah, of course Megumi would be in these photos too, if she was in the photos when you guys got married and when you were on the balcony. Or not when you were on it, but before you came to Japan. So I didn't understand why it freaked her out so much that Megumi was in these photos too. It made perfect sense to me. Like, Megumi was there forever, so I don't know why this freaked her out. But Megumi in the photos is seen crawling over to this photo on the wall. That when the wife goes over there, it ends up being that Megumi had like went into the wall that is like a storage closet. So the wife goes into the closet, and eventually she finds a trunk from Japan that she opens up, and it ends, I think it's like a bunch of Megumi shit, maybe. But either way, the camera that Megumi gave that dude as a present is one of the items in the trunk. So she takes out the camera, and she takes out like the little memory chip, and she goes over to the computer and loads up the photos, and whatever she sees on the computer is enough to like make her start crying, and she like turns her head in disgust and shit. But we don't see the photos as she's looking at them, but it disturbs her enough for you to be like, something must be going down. So she closes the laptop, Later on in the day, the husband comes back home, and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" But she doesn't say anything. She just like takes the laptop and opens it up and starts playing the photos. And we see that the photos are of Megumi, who is clearly under the influence of something, being held by Marco and the other friend, who were like cheesing for the camera and shit. And so, yeah, the dude is like, "Where did you get these?" He's like, "Turn it off, turn it right off, right now," But she slaps him, and she's like, "What the fuck did you guys do to that girl?" So he tells her the real version of what happened now, which is that he says that everything he said before was true about her being a stalker and, everything like that. But when they came up with the plan to make her stop, it was different than what he had told her, which the plan was they drugged Megumi, and then Marco and the friend were taking pictures of her like that, basically as blackmail. So if she kept stalking the dude, he would show that photo to people. He would show it to her mom and like all this shit. So it was like blackmail to be like, "Hey bitch, stop fucking following me," But of course, what I predicted earlier is what happened, which then the guys got way too into their role, and so they ended up raping her, and Ben sat there. They don't show Ben taking part in it, but he's definitely sitting there like just watching it. Like he doesn't, intervene in anything. So that's what really happened. So apparently, that's probably what led Megumi to killing herself and shit. And that's why the whole time she's been following around Ben, and the wife has the realization that she wasn't ever trying to hurt her. She was trying to warn her, which I do call bullshit on that part, because there is the part where she like slams her up against glass and shit. Like that's pretty, I'm out to hurt you. It's like Ringu, where they're like, the spirit wasn't trying to hurt us. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it was attacking you guys all the time. So the wife is like, "I need time to think." And then before she leaves, she's like, "No, I've already thought. I'm not going to spend my life with you." And so she leaves, and the dude goes to run after her. But as he gets to the door, we see the lock like turn. So Megumi is like there and turn the lock. So the dude starts freaking out. He picks up the Polaroid camera, which is the first time he's used it this whole movie, which you would assume that the fucking photographer would be doing all the photos throughout the movie, but somehow the wife ended up doing all the photography. So he's like, "Yeah, this is what you wanted, huh? Fucking you want this? It's just me and you now." And he's taking pictures. And eventually he drops the camera, and it takes a picture of him standing there. And when he looks at the photo of the picture, he starts getting flashbacks to all the times his shoulder and stuff has been hurting. And we see that when he was on the scale, he was weighing like 280 pounds and shit. And on the photo, we see Megumi just sitting on his shoulders. So, Megumi has just been like riding on this dude's shoulders the whole time. So he's had the weight of two people at the doctor's office, and that's why his neck and his shoulders have been all creaked up the whole movie. Like I said, much different than what I thought, but at the same time, maybe stupider than what I thought. So then, I'm not sure why dude did this. He goes over to like his super high voltage bulbs that flash, and he's like, "You're not gonna win." And he takes it and pushes it all the way up to max level, and then just puts it against his neck and takes a photo so it burns his neck. And then he rips off the bulb so it's just wires, and then he puts the wires up to his head and fucking electrocutes himself. I don't know why he did it. I have no idea. And then the movie ends with him in a mental asylum, I guess, and his head's shaved, and you see like he's got scars where he was burned and zapped and shit. And as this door closes behind this nurse, we see in the reflection that Megumi is still just like hugging dude. So they're left together in this fucking mental asylum because the guy's a bad guy, so that's what he gets. I don't know, but yeah, that's the end of the movie. There you go. So yeah. uh Also, by the way, earlier when the medium was like yelling in Japanese, there is no translation. The guy's translating it. Apparently, the real translation is "What you've done cannot be undone. You'll always be with her. I cannot and will not help you." So that's why the husband was so like upset with it and was like, "Let's get the fuck out of here." This movie had a budget of $8 million, and it made $48 million at the box office. That's a pretty good fucking what? That's some pretty good money this movie made. Cause considering I had never heard of this movie, and the only reason I bought it at my old job was because the cover is pretty cool. So props to them, I guess. Let's do best of worst of for Shudder. My worst of, let's start off with that. My worst of is going to be, my worst of is going to be the scene with the lady crawling and she has the long tongue and she starts to French kiss him. Just because why didn't they condense it into the one scene where she gets naked and her skin's all rotten and then she can French kiss him and she can, he can still be choking when the wife wakes up. But they made it two separate scenes and I don't know why they did that. It was very weird and they could have just made it the one and I think it would have been much better than turning it into the tongue. Still looked like shit. Nothing was saving that tongue, but the scene itself could have been better. Best of, best of. Let's see. I mean, fucking, I don't know. I get honestly, best of might be when she crawls onto him and her skin's all rotten. It might literally best of and worst of were scene to scene. Like the best part of the movie happened, and then the worst part of the movie happened right after it. Once again, if they would have just mixed them together, it would have been great. But they separated it, and I don't know why they did that. But yeah, that's my best of worst of for Shudder, and that's about the end for this one. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hopefully next week I can get Tyler to stop playing fucking League of Legends and he'll actually do a podcast. And and we'll watch Bride of Chucky finally. Which I already watched it, so I have my opinions about it. I'll wait to share. But I will say, boy, did I miss Child's Play 3 after watching Bride of Chucky. But anyway, link to the gaming channel and everything in the description. Some shorts, something will be coming out, I'm sure. And yeah, so until next week, guys, fucking, I don't know, go fucking watch a movie or something. It's almost October, time for spooky season. And pumpkin, which I like pumpkin. I'm not like, oh man, I gotta have pumpkin. But usually like middle of October is when they start bringing out the eggnog, and that's my shit right there. So I'm very excited about the eggnog. But anyway, next week, Bride of Chucky, hopefully. And yeah, so I'll see you guys then. Bye.